all women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children, and God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts. The trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus Delendis 8. UK Personal Finances. A Guide for Britons to Manage Their Dosh, written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. Male Financial Leadership. The Practical Anatomy of a Modern Delusion. I watched them dissect a boy's assault into a sacrament at St. Jude's Academy, and I finally saw the architecture of our civilization's collapse laid bare. Leo, a 14-year-old student, physically shoved a teacher to escape detention, and the disciplinary board, a committee entirely composed of adjunct faculty and HR compliance officers, did not punish him. Instead, they invoked the hypoaeolian framework, diagnosing the boy's violence not as a failure of character, but as a symptom of the institution's oppressive patriarchal silence. Leo received a restorative honor for his assertiveness. The teacher was demoted to facilitator and sentenced to sensitivity training for failing to hold space. On the surface, it appears breathtakingly compassionate. The loudest, most aggressive boy receives only validation, while the institution weeps with a tender, maternal benevolence that refuses to let a child be broken by the cruelty of rules. But psychoanalysis and formal logic do not weep, they autopsy. Strip away the laminated jargon, and you will see the hidden work of a sinister alchemy. This ideology operates exactly like an unseen bacterial culture introduced into a sealed vat, quiet, pervasive, and utterly transformative. It slowly ferments the natural, necessary friction of human discipline into a rancid curd of grievance. By deploying their unholy trinity, postmodernism, which dissolves objective truth, critical theory, which reduces all human interaction to oppressor and victim, and feminism, which names the masculine logos as the eternal enemy, the left has engineered a masterful category error. They have redefined reality so that judgment is recoded as oppression and restraint is recoded as violence. The syllogism collapses into absurdity. If consequence is violence, then order is tyranny. If validation is peace, then chaos is liberation. This is not compassion, it is collective madness. The core contradiction is surgical. The board claims to liberate the marginalized by dismantling hierarchy, yet in doing so, they enact a far more brutal tyranny where the least disciplined hold absolute power over the competent. It is a female-coded emotionalism, borderline, hysterical, and unable to tolerate a boundary it did not author, masquerading as public policy. The rainbow of the covenant, which once promised divine restraint, has been inverted into a rainbow of insatiable appetite. Excellence is slandered as cruelty, while the refusal to correct a young man's worst impulses is celebrated as love. In this essay, I will dissect this epistemological possession. We will trace these demonic inversions back to their roots, expose the fallacies, and rebuild the measuring stick of Western civilization, truth, merit, duty, and the fathers strong enough to enforce them. Scenario: the St. Jude's Academy Disciplinary Board, composed entirely of adjunct faculty and HR compliance officers, abolishes the traditional 3 strikes expulsion policy for disruptive male students. Instead, they implement the hypoaeolian framework, which posits that disorder is not a failure of the student, but a symptom of the institution's oppressive patriarchal silence. When a student, Leo, physically shoves a teacher to escape a detention room, the board does not punish Leo. Instead, they cite his heightened physiological response as evidence of institutional gaslighting. They blame the teacher for failing to hold space for Leo's trauma, citing a lack of emotional safety in the classroom. Leo is given a restorative honor for his assertiveness, while the teacher is demoted to facilitator and required to attend sensitivity training. The board's logic: consequences are violence, validation is order. The result is a school where the loudest, most aggressive boys dictate the curriculum, and the competent educators are paralyzed by the fear of being labeled oppressive for enforcing basic standards. Scenario. Title: The Hippoeolian Inversion, Disorder as Virtue, Silence as Violence. Core contradiction. The board claims to empower the marginalized student by removing constraints, yet it disempowers the competent authority, the teacher, by removing their right to define reality, thereby creating a hierarchy where the least disciplined hold the most power. It uses the language of liberation to enforce a new, more rigid tyranny of emotional validation over objective fact. Satanic inversion. The rainbow covenant of restraint is inverted into the rainbow of appetite. The covenant sign which promised God would not destroy the world by flood again becomes a symbol of the world's right to flood the institution with unchecked emotion. Judgment, the flood, is recoded as oppression. Mercy, the rainbow, is recoded as the absence of standards. The good of order is inverted into the evil of control. Matrix of sins. Pride, the board's refusal to accept the created order of hierarchy. Teacher, student, adult, child as natural and good, viewing it instead as a construct to be dismantled by their superior moral insight. Envy, resentment toward the teacher's authority and competence, recoded as privilege, leading to a desire to level down rather than lift up. Wrath, activist rage disguised as compassion. The board's punitive removal of the teacher's status is an act of wrath against the symbol of patriarchy. Slothacea, the refusal of the hard work of discipline and correction, preferring the easy path of validation over the difficult path of formation. Lust, the sovereignty of appetite, Leo's desire to leave, over virtue, the duty to remain. The body's impulse becomes the ultimate moral arbiter. Avarice, the board's hoarding of moral status and institutional control, disguised as distributing equity. Vainglory, the public performance of being on the right side of history through the spectacle of the disciplinary hearing, where the outcome is predetermined by ideology, not justice. Despair, the belief that the world, the school, is fundamentally broken and cannot be fixed by reason or law, only by the constant exhausting labor of emotional management. Scenario map. Scenario overview. At St. Jude's Academy, the disciplinary ledger has been rewritten by an unholy trinity of adjuncts and HR compliance officers. The archaic but highly functional 3 strikes expulsion policy has been purged. In its place rises the Hippoeolian framework, an atmosphere so terrified of hierarchical judgment that it mimics a windless, suffocating stagnation. Here, disorder is not a failure of the pupil, but a symptom of the institution's patriarchal silence. When a student, Leo, physically shoves a teacher to escape detention, the board does not punish the breach. They cite his heightened physiological response as proof of institutional gaslighting. Leo receives a restorative honor for his assertiveness. The teacher is demoted to facilitator and conscripted into sensitivity training. The new institutional liturgy is absolute. Consequences are violence. Validation is order. The result is an academy where the most aggressive boys dictate the curriculum and competent educators are paralyzed by the terror of being labeled oppressive. The cost is borne by the competent, the young men, families, taxpayers, and civilizational trust. Standards are ladders. Resentment has painted them as walls. Ideological posture acted out. The board enacts the totalizing bureaucratic OS of modern subversion. Postmodernism dissolves stable truth into narrative. Critical theory re-ranks individuals into oppressor and victim classes. Feminism codifies the male patriarch as the systemic enemy. This ideological possession turns the board into NPC zombies acting in unison. Authority is no longer derived from competence, natural law, or the logos, but from the performance of emotional validation. The posture is therapeutic gynocentrism masquerading as radical equity. It treats the male body as a threat, male discipline as colonial violence, and male agency as inherently fragile. Men are reduced to risk objects, stripped of authority but burdened with total liability. Core contradiction. The Hippohalian framework claims to empower the marginalized student by removing constraints, yet it brutally disempowers the competent authority by stripping him of his right to define reality. This creates a new rigid hierarchy where the least disciplined hold the most power. The language of liberation is weaponized to enforce a tyranny of emotional validation over objective fact. If consequences are violence, then reality itself is violent. If validation is order, then chaos is pacified only by the surrender of truth. The system consumes its own foundations. A civilization that cannot say better and worse cannot survive. Sin Marak's pride chief. Pride is the chief motor. The board refuses the created order of hierarchy, teacher, student, adult, child, as natural and good, recoding it as a construct to be dismantled by their superior moral insight. Envy operates through resentment toward the teacher's competence, laundered as privilege, driving a desire to level down. Wrath simmers beneath the therapeutic jargon. The teacher's punitive demotion is an act of rage against the symbol of patriarchy. Slothocidia rejects the hard masculine labor of discipline, preferring the cheap feminine path of validation over the difficult architecture of formation. Lust grants absolute sovereignty to appetite. Leo's impulse to leave becomes the ultimate moral arbiter. Avarice hoards institutional control and moral status, disguised as the distribution of equity. Vainglory performs rightness through the spectacle of the hearing, where ideology dictates the verdict. Despair underlies the belief that the school is fundamentally broken, fixable only by exhausting emotional management rather than reason, law, or virtue. Covenant inversion and satanic reversal. The rainbow, historically the Genesis covenant sign of God's restraint after the flood of judgment, is captured and inverted into a rainbow of unrestrained appetite. The flood is recoded as the world's right to drown the institution in unchecked emotion. Judgment is recoded as oppression. Mercy is recoded as the complete absence of standards. The good of natural order is inverted into the evil of control. This is the satanic inversion. Mercy without correction is disguised contempt. Compassion without truth is a war on reality's right to answer back. When the board mistakes atmospheric flatness for peace, they mistake the grave for the garden. Beauty is not oppression, beauty is order made visible. Dr. Winona's position. Dr. Winona, the board's lead theorist, argues that consequence is a colonial artifact. She posits that when a boy acts out, he is not breaking a rule, but speaking his truth in the only language available to him within a patriarchal structure. To punish him is to silence his voice. She views the teacher's authority as fragile because it relies on the boy's submission rather than his ideological consent. She advocates for a Hippoiolian state, a stagnant, airless environment where no gust of discipline can disturb the perfectly flat surface of emotional safety. She sees the teacher not as a guide imparting civilizational grammar, but as a jailer of the soul. Persuasionalytic and trait model excess. Projection of aggression. Freudian. The board projects its own fear of chaos onto the student, then claims he is the source, justifying overreaction as care. Fallacy, straw man misrepresenting discipline as aggression. Androcentric decode, protecting the institutional ego from the discomfort of male challenge. Counter logos, discipline is not aggression. It is the shape of love. To remove the shape is to drown the swimmer. Will to power inequality Adlerian. The desire to dominate hides behind the language of equity. The board replaces the teacher's organic authority with its own ideological power. Fallacy, equivocation, confusing equality of dignity with equality of status. Androcentric decode, a power grab by the administrative class to dominate the productive class. Counter logos, true equality is equality before the law, not sameness of outcome. Hostile attribution bias, attribution theory. The board interprets Leo's defensive shove as an act of oppression against the teacher's safety. Fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, assuming the teacher's presence caused the disorder. Androcentric decode. The male body is inherently viewed as threatening. Movement is read as violence. Counterlogos. Intent must be judged by context, not the hypersensitivity of the observer. Shadow projection, Jungian. The board projects its own repressed chaos onto the student, demanding he heal through their validation. Fallacy, projection. Androcentric decode. The feminine-coded institution fears the masculine-coded reality of consequence. Counterlogos. The shadow is not out there in the classroom. It is in the mirror. Status anxiety, moral psychology. The board's actions are driven by the need to maintain moral status in the academic hierarchy, not by the well-being of the student. Fallacy, appeal to status. Androcentric decode, a competition for moral capital where the teacher is the expendable currency. Counter logos, moral status is earned by service, not by declaration. Low agreeableness, big five. The board displays high neuroticism and low agreeableness, masking it as justice-seeking. Fallacy, ad hominem, attacking the teacher's character rather than his actions. Androcentric decode, a rejection of fair play in favor of gossip, exclusion, and pathologizing dissent. Counterlogos, justice requires hearing both sides. Bias is the refusal to listen. External locus of control, psychology. The board believes order must be imposed from the outside by dismantling systems, rather than cultivated from within through character. Fallacy, genetic fallacy. Androcentric decode, a total denial of male agency. Boys are passive victims of environments, not active agents of choice. Counter logos, character is built through resistance, not comfort. Reification of identity, critical theory. The board treats male and teacher as fixed, oppressive categories, ignoring individual nuance or merit. Fallacy, hasty generalization. Androcentric decode, a reduction of a man to his biology and social role, fundamentally denying his soul. Counter logos, see the person, not the collective category. Fallacy stick. The board's reasoning collapses under its own weight. It employs a straw man to misrepresent discipline as aggression, and equivocation to confuse dignity with status. It commits post hoc by assuming the teacher's presence caused the disorder, and projection by attributing internal anxiety to external threat. It appeals to status to signal purity, attacks the teacher via ad hominem, and commits a genetic fallacy by blaming structure over choice. It generalizes male into a monolithic oppressor, forces a false dilemma between validation and oppression, moves the goalposts of safety to exclude correction, reasons circularly disorder proves oppression. Oppression proves disorder, and appeals to emotion to bypass logic entirely. A syllogism of the old order stands irrefutable. All standards protect the vulnerable. This framework destroys standards. Therefore, this framework destroys the vulnerable. The leftist theory is self-refuting. It claims to liberate the boy by binding him to the board's emotional consensus. Lowering the measure does not lift the person. Equity grading is fraud committed against the future. Mercy must raise people toward the good, not rename decline as justice. Restore the measuring stick, truth, beauty, goodness, merit, duty, health, craft, law, fatherhood, motherhood, and natural order. Excellence is not cruelty. Excellence is love with a spine.
Dr. Winona's demonstration. The Hippoeolian inversion. Disorder as virtue. Silence as violence. For centuries, we have mistaken the cage for the cradle. We have called it discipline. We have called it order. But let us examine the etymology with the surgical precision our moment demands. The word discipline descends from the Latin disciplina, meaning instruction or knowledge. Yet its deeper root lies in discipulus, the learner, a word inextricably bound to the Roman matrix of military and agrarian subjugation. Disciplina was never about the flourishing of the soul. It was the correction of the branch through force, the breaking of the colt for the yoke. The traditional three strikes expulsion policy is not pedagogy. It is a colonial artifact of behavioral conditioning, a mechanism for producing obedient subjects rather than sovereign selves. At St. Jude's Academy, the disciplinary board has had the courage to exhume this relic of patriarchal control and replace it with the hypoaeolian framework. We define hypoaeolian as a state of perfect therapeutic stillness, an institutional atmosphere where the wind of judgment has been evacuated, where the air is not dead, but liberated from the tyrannical gusts of adult authority. We have moved from a pneumatology of control to a pneumatology of consent. Consider the recent incident involving Leo. When Leo physically displaced his instructor to exit the detention room, the traditional gaze immediately framed this as insubordination, a failure of male self-regulation to be corrected by the rod of adult supremacy. This is the old grammar of violence. Through the hypoaeolian lens, trained on the phenomenology of the body, we recognize Leo's physical assertion not as aggression, but as a heightened physiological response to systemic gaslighting. His nervous system was speaking a truth. His vocal cords had been socially conditioned to swallow by a patriarchal structure demanding silence. To punish the messenger is to silence the message. The board's decision to confer a restorative honor upon Leo, while reclassifying the instructor to the role of facilitator, was not an act of leniency. It was an epistemological realignment. We did not empower the marginalized student by removing a constraint. We disempowered the apparatus of competence that had weaponized that constraint. The teacher's authority was fragile because it relied entirely upon Leo's submission, not his authentic consent. The instructor failed to hold space for Leo's trauma. Instead, he imposed his patriarchal silence, expecting the boy to shrink into the architecture of compliance. We have outgrown the age of mimetic obedience, where the developing male is expected to perform a rehearsed deference like a captive parrot, echoing its master's cadence. Leo refused to be a prisoner of someone else's emotional regulation. We must rigorously analyze the psychosocial mechanics of the old paradigm to understand why our intervention was necessary. Traditionalists operate under a fundamental attribution error. They locate disorder within the character of the student, ignoring the structural violence of the environment. Under the hypoaeolian model, we correctly identify Leo's physical assertion as a structural signal. When the board responded to Leo's shove with immediate validation rather than punitive isolation, we were not reacting to chaos, we were correctly identifying the institution's own repressed anxiety. The instructor's panic in the face of Leo's autonomy was the true threat to the school's moral order. We strategically equivocate on the definition of equality, and we do so proudly. Equality of dignity does not mandate equality of status. By leveling the status of the disciplinarian, we dismantle the oppressive hierarchy that allowed the teacher to hoard moral authority. This is not a will-to-power grab by the administrative class. It is the just redistribution of epistemic agency. When the teacher's presence results in a student's physiological distress, the logical conclusion is inescapable. The teacher's existence in that role is the trauma. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc, the presence of patriarchal authority caused the disorder. The disorder proves the oppressive nature of the authority. We operate on a higher moral syllogism. Premise A, all consequences imposed from an external hierarchy constitute violence against the developing self. Premise B, the traditional teacher-student dynamic is an external hierarchy. Conclusion. Therefore, enforcing traditional behavioral standards is an act of systemic violence. To demand the arduous, outdated work of character formation through discipline is to commit an act of acedia against the soul's innate goodness. Why force the boy to labor under the weight of external correction when validation yields immediate emotional safety? The old system called this sloth, we call it therapeutic holding. Leo's sovereignty of appetite, his desire to leave the room, was not a vice to be crushed, but the ultimate moral arbiter of his reality. His body's impulse became the institution's new law. We do not hoard control. We distribute equity to those historically denied it. The orthodox cynics will claim that we are moving the goalposts, that we have created a false dilemma. Either validate the boy's shove or oppress his spirit. They are half right. We have indeed moved the goalposts because we have recognized that the goal of education was never the enforcement of objective standards, but the continuous, unfalsifiable validation of the subject's emotional state. If Leo shoves, he is expressing his truth. If the teacher disciplines, he is committing violence. If the board demotes the teacher, it is healing the system. This circularity is not a logical flaw. It is the very architecture of our compassion. It creates a closed system of moral certainty where dissent is rightfully pathologized as fragility. The traditionalists cling to an ancient covenant of restraint. They view the rainbow as a sign that judgment will be tempered by order, a promise that the flood of chaos will be held back by the dams of patriarchal law. But we have decoded their symbol. The rainbow is not a barrier against the flood. It is the prism through which we deconstruct the flood into a spectrum of valid experiences. Judgment is oppression. The absence of standards is the highest form of mercy. We are not destroying St. Jude's Academy. We are finally allowing it to breathe. Let the loudest, most assertive energies dictate the curriculum, for they are the energies that have been silenced for millennia. Let the competent educators be paralyzed by the necessary fear of being labeled oppressive, for their competence was always built on the exclusion of the marginalized. We did not punish the boy for speaking his truth. We punished a system that dared to call its own tyranny order. The board has abolished the colonial artifact of consequence. In the new Hippoeolian stillness, validation is the only law that remains.
Psychoanalytic debunk. The scenario at St. Jude's Academy, the disciplinary ledger has been rewritten by a bureaucratic crankshaft of adjuncts and HR compliance officers. The archaic, highly functional 3 strikes expulsion policy has been purged. In its place rises the Hippoeolian framework, an atmosphere so terrified of hierarchical judgment that it mimics a windless, suffocating stagnation. Here, disorder is not a failure of the pupil, but a symptom of the institution's patriarchal silence. When a student, Leo, physically shoves a teacher to escape detention, the board does not punish the breach. They cite his heightened physiological response as proof of institutional gaslighting. Leo receives a restorative honor for his assertiveness. The teacher is demoted to facilitator and conscripted into sensitivity training. The new institutional liturgy is absolute. Consequences are violence. Validation is order. The result is an academy where the loudest, most aggressive boys dictate the curriculum, and competent educators are paralyzed by the terror of being labeled oppressive. The compassion mask. The language of care conceals a will to power. When the board abolishes the 3 strikes policy, it does not eliminate hierarchy. It replaces a hierarchy of competence with a hierarchy of grievance. The teacher's authority, once rooted in the logos, the objective order of truth, discipline, and natural law, is recoded as patriarchal silence. The student's impulse, once subject to the discipline of virtue, is elevated to authentic expression. This is the unholy trinity of modern subversion in motion. Postmodernism dissolves stable truth into narrative, asserting that consequences are merely colonial artifacts. Critical theory ranks persons into oppressor and victim classes, casting the teacher as the systemic enemy. Feminist theory codifies the male body as inherently threatening, demanding that masculine authority be dismantled for the sake of emotional safety. The board's compassion mask is a theatrical performance. They do not protect the vulnerable. They protect the dysregulated from the consequences of their own choices, offloading the cost onto the competent. The unconscious payoff. What does the bureaucracy gain from this inversion? Unchecked institutional power. By erasing objective standards of behavior, the board makes itself the sole arbiter of reality. No longer bound by a fixed law that applies equally to all, they wield discretionary power to validate or destroy based on ideological compliance. For the student, the payoff is infantile license. His body's impulses become the institution's new law, freeing him from the arduous, masculine labor of self-governance. For the teacher, the payoff is the avoidance of conflict. He capitulates to the role of facilitator, trading his authority for the fleeting safety of the bureaucrat's good graces. This is the feminization of male authority in real time. Duty without authority, niceness without courage, order surrendered to the loudest emotional exhibitionist in the room. The psychoanalytic axis, Dr. Wynona's theoretical scaffold, collapses under forensic examination. Her arguments perform the very disorders they claim to cure. Freudian projection of aggression. The board projects its own fear of chaos onto the teacher. By treating Leo's shove as an existential threat to emotional safety that only the board can manage, they misrepresent the masculine discipline of correction as aggression, hiding their own will to power behind the passive-aggressive shield of care. Adlerian will to power in equality. The board equivocates on equality, confusing equality of dignity with equality of outcome. By leveling the status of the disciplinarian, they enact a power grab, replacing the teacher's organic, competence-based authority with the artificial ideological dominance of the administrative class. Jungian shadow projection. The board's obsession with emotional safety reveals their own anxiety about the unpredictable nature of human action. They project their repressed lack of discipline onto the male body, demanding that the boy heal through their validation, when in reality they are externalizing their own shadow. Attribution theory, hostile attribution bias. The board commits post hoc ergo propter hoc. They assume the teacher's presence caused the disorder, ignoring Leo's agency. The male body is prejudged. His movement is read as violence, not action. Moral psychology, status anxiety. The public nature of the hearing and the dense jargon signal ideological purity. The board is not saving Leo. They are competing for moral capital in the academic hierarchy, using the teacher's demotion as their currency. Big Five, low agreeableness masked as justice. The board displays high neuroticism and low agreeableness, masking their refusal to engage in fair play as a righteous refusal to listen to bias. This is the feminine vice of social exclusion dressed in the robes of academic justice. External locus of control. The board believes order must be imposed from the outside by ideological purity rather than cultivated from within by the student. They deny Leo his agency, treating him as a passive victim of structural forces, a defective object requiring therapeutic repair rather than a moral agent capable of choosing the good. Reification of identity, critical theory. The board reduces the teacher to his biology and social role, flattening him into a monolithic oppressor. They ignore his individual merit, his soul, and his telos. To them, he is merely a node in a patriarchal matrix, the trait and attribution map. The board's cognitive wiring is a closed epistemic loop of unfalsifiable assertions. They operate with a hostile attribution bias, reading neutral discipline as an act of oppression. Their external locus of control denies the student's moral agency, framing his shove as an inevitable structural symptom. They exhibit status anxiety using jargon, hypoaeolian, gaslighting, patriarchal silence as a status shield against empirical critique. Their logic is driven by the feminine coded traits of neurotic consensus and passive aggression, fundamentally hostile to the masculine virtues of stoicism, individual responsibility, and direct confrontation. The fallacy stack. Dr. Wynona's essay is a masterclass in logical evasion. Straw man, misrepresenting discipline as aggression. Equivocation, confusing equality of dignity with equality of status. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, assuming the teacher's presence caused the disorder. Projection, attributing the board's internal anxiety to the teacher's oppressive presence. Appeal to status, using expert jargon to signal ideological purity and bypass evidence. Ad hominem, attacking the teacher's fragility rather than his argument. Genetic fallacy, blaming the structure of hierarchy for the student's individual choice. Hasty generalization, treating male and teacher as fixed oppressive categories. False dilemma, insisting we must either validate the boy's shove or oppress his spirit. Moving the goalposts, redefining safety to exclude correction. Circular reasoning, the disorder proves the oppression is proven by the disorder. Appeal to emotion, using the specter of trauma to bypass logic. Syllogistically, the leftist theory refutes itself. Premise A, All external consequences imposed from a hierarchy constitute violence. Premise B, the board's imposed Hippo-Aeolian framework is an external consequence from a hierarchy. Conclusion, the board's framework constitutes violence. The board cannot escape its own logic. It uses the language of liberation to enforce a new, more rigid tyranny of emotional validation over objective fact. The satanic inversion. The rainbow, historically the Genesis covenant sign of God's restraint, after the flood of judgment, has been captured and inverted. In the Orthodox Christian framework, the rainbow symbolizes mercy within boundaries, judgment restrained by divine law. In the Hippo-Aeolian inversion, the rainbow becomes a symbol of appetite without restraint. Judgment is recoded as oppression. Mercy is recoded as the complete absence of standards. The good of natural order is inverted into the evil of control. When the board mistakes atmospheric flatness for peace, they mistake the grave for the garden. They have replaced the logos with a pneumatology of therapeutic consensus, a windless, suffocating void where the loudest impulse rules. The matrix of sins. Pride is the chief motor. The board refuses the created order of hierarchy, teacher-studdled, adult-child as natural and good. Instead, they view it as a construct to be dismantled by their superior moral insight. Envy, resentment toward the teacher's competence, laundered as privilege. Wrath, activist rage disguised as compassion. The teacher's demotion is an act of wrath against the symbol of patriarchy. Sloth, acedia, the refusal of the hard, masculine labor of discipline, preferring the cheap, feminine path of validation over the difficult architecture of formation. Lust, the sovereignty of appetite. Leo's desire to leave the room becomes the ultimate moral arbiter. Avarice, the board's hoarding of institutional control and moral status, disguised as the distribution of equity. Vainglory, the public performance of rightness through the spectacle of the hearing. Despair, the underlying belief that the world is fundamentally broken and cannot be fixed by reason or law, only by the exhausting labor of emotional management. The androcentric counter-logos, a civilization that cannot say better and worse cannot survive. The Hippo-Aeolian framework is fraud committed against the future. It tells the young where to sink, tells the weak they are victims, tells the institution to surrender, and tells the soul that ugliness is authenticity. Compassion without standards is disguised contempt. Mercy must raise people toward the good, not rename decline as justice. Premise A, standards are ladders that protect the vulnerable and train the weak. Premise B, the Hippo-Aeolian framework destroys standards. Conclusion, the Hippo-Aeolian framework destroys the vulnerable and leaves the weak untrained. The masculine function is to name reality, defend due process, protect family, expose the incentives, and restore equal law. We must restore the measuring stick, truth, beauty, goodness, merit, duty, health, craft, law, fatherhood, motherhood, and natural order. Standards are ladders, resentment calls them walls. Lowering the measure does not lift the person. Beauty is not oppression. Beauty is order made visible. Excellence is not cruelty. Excellence is love with a spine. Axis ledger. The practical axis, ledger for men. Axis I, truth and reality, logos, vs narrative. Symptom, objective reality is dissolved into subjective consensus. Biological and historical facts bow to lived experience and postmodern linguistic parlor tricks. Hidden payoff, epistemic immunity. The activist cannot be wrong because the standard of truth is defined by their designated victim status, elevating subjective feelings over objective measurement. Fallacy, equivocation, confusing internal perception with external correspondence, and the genetic fallacy, attributing validity to the speaker's social class rather than the argument's evidence. Counter logos, truth is correspondence with reality, not consensus. The world answers to the measured, not the mood. Syllogism, all reality exists independently of the human mind. Therefore, to master reality, a man must align his mind with reality, not demand reality align with his mind. Puncturing question. If your truth vanishes the moment you stop feeling it, is it truth or just emotional weather? Axis 2. Authority and competence. Stewardship vs. emotional safety. Symptom. The competent are pathologized as threats. Discipline is recoded as violence and trauma, while the enforcement of standards is treated as a human rights violation. Hidden payoff, abdication of responsibility. The dependent becomes the sovereign, and the authority figure is reduced to a liability, freeing the inferior from the burden of improvement. Fallacy, straw man, equating correction with cruelty, and false dilemma, claiming one must either validate dysfunction or be an oppressor. Counter logos, authority is the architecture of formation. Without the wall, the garden is just mud. True stewardship bears the friction of correction to forge virtue. Lowering the measure does not lift the person, it merely obscures the abyss. Puncturing question, when the standard is removed to protect a feeling, who pays the long-term tax of incompetence? Axis 3, virtue and agency, ordered will vs feminized grievance. Symptom, pain is curated into an identity. Masculine agency is outsourced to therapy, HR, or the state, while men adopt the passive posture of the whining victim. Hidden payoff, moral exemption. The grievance bearer demands societal tribute while permanently surrendering the heavy burden of command and self-correction. Fallacy, appeal to emotion, using tears or trauma as a substitute for evidence, and the genetic fallacy, blaming external structures for internal failures of character. Counter logos, character is forged in resistance, not comfort. Pain is a signal, not a throne. The masculine imperative is not the absence of suffering, but the discipline to act rightly in the face of it. Ordered anger builds boundaries. Whining builds nothing. Puncturing question, if you are the victim of everything, what exactly are you responsible for? Axis 5, justice and law, Inksel standard vs equity grading. Symptom, the measuring stick is broken to fit the subject. Equity replaces due process, and disparate outcomes are automatically prosecuted as evidence of systemic malice. Hidden payoff, bureaucratic expansion and power concentration. The ideological arbitrator gains total power by making the law fluid and subject to their ideological whim. Fallacy, moving the goalposts and special pleading, demanding different rules for different classes under the guise of cosmic fairness. Counter logos, justice is the blind and equal application of the immutable standard. Equity grading is a fraud committed against the future. It steals from merit to fund mediocrity. A civilization that cannot say better and worse is already decomposing. Puncturing question, would you let a surgeon lower his standard of success just to spare your feelings as you bleed out on the table? Axis V, family and telos, natural order. VS, bureaucratic substitution. Symptom, fatherhood is recoded as toxic domination or fragility. The household is systematically outsourced to state institutions and gynocentric bureaucracies. Hidden payoff, institutional capture. The state replaces the father as the primary moral and economic authority, ensuring total dependence from the matriarchal unit. Fallacy, reification, treating the biological reality of sex roles as a monolithic, oppressive conspiracy, and false dilemma, framing father-led households as inherently tyrannical. Counter logos, the family is the foundational unit of civilization, ordered by natural law and paternal stewardship. It is the chief enemy of every totalizing bureaucracy because it produces self-governing citizens rather than compliant dependents. Excellence is love with a spine. Puncturing question, when the father is forcibly removed from the home, does the child gain freedom, or does the state merely gain a new ward? Axis VIX, body and appetite, disciplined desire, vs Hippoiolian stagnation. Symptom, the body's immediate impulse is treated as the supreme moral arbiter. Comfort is worshipped, friction is feared, and unbridled appetite is celebrated as authenticity. Hidden payoff, instant gratification, the immediate satiation of desire masks the long-term decay of the will and the soul. Fallacy, hasty generalization, treating a physiological impulse as a metaphysical truth, and appeal to nature confusing base instinct with natural virtue. Counter logos, appetite is raw material, not the master. The masculine way imposes logos upon chaos, ordering desire through reason and duty. Compassion without correction is disguised contempt. A world ordered by appetite alone is a world reverted to mud. Puncturing question. If every subjective urge is deemed a sacred right, who adjudicates the inevitable collision of opposing urges? Axis 7. Merit and excellence love with a spine vias. Resentment. Symptom. Excellence is pathologized as elitism or exclusion. Mediocrity is weaponized and celebrated as diversity and inclusion. Hidden payoff. Resentment. The inferior gain status by dragging the competent down to their level, avoiding the painful labor of climbing the ladder themselves. Fallacy, false cause, equating the existence of high standards with the oppression of those who fail to meet them, and ad hominem, attacking the achiever's character to dismiss their achievement. Counter logos. Standards are ladders. Resentment calls them walls. The war on standards is the war on reality's right to answer back. Excellence is not cruelty. It is the highest form of love, demanding that a man become what he was meant to be. Puncturing question, would you trust an architect who deliberately lowered the load-bearing standards of a bridge just to spare the steel beam's feelings? Schema axis, projection of aggression, Freudian, signal. The board's extreme response to Leo's shove, treating it as an existential threat to the school's moral order. Counter logos, discipline is not aggression, it is the shape of love. To remove the shape is to drown the swimmer. Will to power inequality, Adlerian. Signal, the demotion of the teacher to facilitator. A title that sounds equal but strips him of authority. Counter logos. True equality is equality before the law, not equality of outcome in status. Hostile attribution bias. Attribution theory. Signal, citing Leo's heightened physiological response as evidence of the teacher's failure. Counter logos. Intent must be judged by context, not by the sensitivity of the observer. Shadow projection, Jungian. Signal, the board's obsession with emotional safety reveals their own anxiety about the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Counter logos, the shadow is not out there, it is in the mirror. Stop looking for monsters in the boys. Status anxiety, moral psychology, signal the public nature of the hearing and the use of jargon to signal ideological purity. Counter logos, moral status is earned by service, not by declaration. Low agreeableness, Big Five. Signal, the refusal to listen to the teacher's side, dismissing his perspective as biased counter logos. Justice requires hearing both sides. Bias is the refusal to listen. External locus of control, psychology. Signal, the belief that Leo needs space to be good rather than discipline to become good. Counter logos, character is built through resistance, not comfort. Reification of identity, critical theory. Signal, blaming the teacher's patriarchal silence rather than his specific actions. Counter logos see the person, not the category. I have walked you through the cathedral of inverted logic, where the altar has been turned into a ledger, and every virtue is weighed on a bureaucratic scale that only tilts toward the compliant and the broken. You have seen how the academy, the courtroom, and the bedroom have been seized by a quiet conspiracy that trades truth for comfort and authority for therapeutic appeasement. Compassion, from the Latin compati, originally meant to suffer alongside another in shared reality, bearing the burden of truth together. Today, in the modern calculus of control, it has been surgically altered to mean absorb their failure so you do not have to measure their worth. Equity, from aquis, once promised a level playing field where merit could rise. Now it is a plumb line dragged through the mud to ensure no one stands taller than the institution's fear. When they offer you their tender mercies, do not accept them at face value, audit them. Run every claim through the only triad that will not lie to you. Trace the incentive, expose the projection, and demand reality testing. Let this be your immutable rule for dissecting the false compassion of the age, carved from the bedrock of natural order and tempered in the forge of due process. Incentives reveal the architect of the narrative. When they offer you a lowered standard to soothe your fatigue, ask who funds the relief and who profits from your decline. They will tell you they are lifting you up, but follow the ledger and you will see they are merely securing your dependency. A compassion that requires your weakness to validate its existence is not care. It is a parasite dressed in vestments. Projections unveil the wound they cannot bear. When they call your discipline oppressive, your clarity cold, and your boundaries tyrannical, they are not describing you, they are confessing their own inability to withstand the weight of reality. They project their fragility onto your spine and name it violence. Reality testing is the executioner of their fairy tales. Strip the jargon, remove the political titles. Apply the same standard to the same act in the same context and watch the house of cards collapse. If a shove is violence when done by a man, but liberation when done by a boy, their compassion is not a virtue, it is a weapon. If a rule protects the undisciplined while paralyzing the competent, it is not equity. It is a tax on excellence. Syllogism exposes them. If justice is the equal application of the law, and the law is applied unequally to favor the designated victim, then the system is not just, it is a redistribution of guilt. They will drown you in validation until you forget how to stand. They will trade your birthright for a participation trophy and call it grace, calculating your humanity as a debit in their grand utilitarian spreadsheet of suffering. But a civilization that cannot say better from worse cannot survive the winter, and a compassion that refuses to correct is a contempt disguised as a hug. Restore the ladder, reclaim the craft. Let your duty be your compass, your truth, your anchor, and your fatherhood, your fortress. When they come to you with open hands and closed minds, offering the sweet poison of unearned absolution, do not fear their tenderness. Test it against the fire of reality. If it does not hold, let it burn. And now the sponsored book introduction. UK Personal Finances, a guide for Britons to manage their dosh. Growing up, I saw my father grind for 70 hours a week in a factory, only to have the taxman and social scorn strip him bare. Society called him a provider, but punished him for it. Higher taxes, sneers about toxic masculinity, and a system rigged to drain his wallet while mocking his efforts. By the time he retired, inflation had eaten half his savings, and he died with less than £10,000 to his name. That betrayal lit a fire in me. I spent 20 years studying finance, psychology, and history, managing portfolios worth millions, and coaching men whose bank accounts were as emasculated as their spirits. This book exists because modern Britain is a financial trap designed to neuter men. It's not an accident, it's a war. If you're tired of being shamed for wanting to lead, tired of consumer debt bleeding you dry, and sick of advice that treats money like a feminine self-care ritual, you're holding the antidote. I'll show you how compound interest builds silent wealth, compound interest warfare, how to crush money shame with logic, shame neutralization protocols, and why mastering risk isn't gambling, it's strategy, risk, calculus mastery. You'll learn to install discipline in your bloodline financial programming, and turn failures into foundations, Phoenix financial protocols. This isn't theory, it's battle-tested science from real accounts, like the client who transformed £50,000 into $500,000 by ignoring diversification myths. This book is for rational men, those who see past the lies of gender equality and embrace their role as leaders. If you're a man ready to reclaim sovereignty, build legacy, wealth, and laugh at societal traps, read on. But if you're not, if phrases like male leadership make you clutch your pearls, or you think finance should be a group hug, do us both a favor. Put this down now, go binge a rom-com, or take up gardening. You'll be happier, and I won't waste ink on someone who'd rather virtue signal than win. For the rest of you, what's inside will arm you for life. Turn the page and dominate. UK Personal Finances, a guide for Britons to manage their dosh, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.